Hey everyone, Rodney here at CleaveStack, and today I'll be covering the install and basics of using the SwarmUI from mcmonkey. Many of you may have watched my videos on Fooocus, and today I hope this is the start of a similar journey with Swarm and many new models such as Flux. I'll also show you how to get up and running with Flux and Swarm. There is some documentation on using Swarm on GitHub on the docs section, which I will include a link to in the description. You can find many answers to your questions on using Swarm in there. If you're not familiar with Swarm, it is a great user interface which uses ComfyUI for the backend, which means you get the benefits of Comfy without the hassle, since mcmonkey is working to make the interface easier to use. There's definitely some room for improvement, but from what I've seen so far, I think it'll turn out much easier to use than most others, and maybe even more than Fooocus. If you have any issues with Swarm, I do recommend heading over to the Discord for help, since it is pretty active over there and helpful. And as for the minimum requirements for Swarm, much of that depends on the model being used. Nvidia is, of course, the recommended GPU, and the more video RAM you have, the better usually. I myself am running on an i5 with 32 gigs of RAM, and I have a 4070 with 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So why don't we jump right into the install of Swarm. Okay, so for installing Swarm, there's a few different possible things that you could run into. So I've set up a couple different variations of the install process to hopefully cover most possibilities of what you might run into. And if you've installed other software from GitHub or any of the other AI tools, more than likely a lot of this stuff you already have installed, so you may not even need to do most of these things. So the first thing you want to make sure is you're on the correct page. There was a Swarm page and still exists for the previous Swarm under stability. You want the one that's under mcmonkey projects. That's the SwarmUI that you want. And we're going to scroll down, and I do recommend reading over everything and understanding what's on the page, what it does. We're going to go down to the installing on Windows, because that's what we'll be installing it on. I do have a fresh install of Windows 10 here just to show you, because that would require the most steps if you don't have anything and you have Windows 10. If you have Windows 11, a lot of this stuff is automated, the installing Git and the .NET. So first, let's start off. We're going to download the install windows.bat file. Go ahead and download that. Depending on your system, you may get warnings about it. And here it's asking us, no, you don't want it. It's not safe, possibly. So we're going to tell it to keep it, and then I'm going to get another warning, and I'm going to say no, keep anyways. Once that's downloaded, I'm going to open up the folder. Now, at this point, I'm going to take the file and move it to where I want to install it. So on mine, I have not set up a folder. So let's set up a new folder, because I like to keep everything in a specific folder or on a separate drive myself. I'm going to be showing you and moving over to my regular install after, once I get it started, set up, and get past these sorts of things that you may run into. And I do recommend putting it on an SSD drive. So we're going to install it in here. Now, if you don't see the extension, I do recommend turning on file extensions in Explorer here, so you can see all file extensions. That's just my personal preference. Now, if we were to run this and we don't have the things installed that we need, first thing is you're going to get these warnings, run anyway. And we're going to get errors in here because I don't have anything installed. Now, the first two errors we're going to get no matter what, because I'm on Windows 10. If you're on Windows 11, this would go ahead and get all the stuff that you need. So on Windows 11, you should be fine by just moving it to the folder that you want and running the bat file. But if you're on Windows 10 like I am right here, and you don't have the Git installed or anything like that, then that's what you'll have to do, is these next couple steps. And that is, first, let's go over and we're going to install Git, and I'll open both of these pages. So on the Git page, I'm just going to go ahead and click to download the latest Git installer. We will open that, run it. Now for this, I'm just going to go ahead and put all the defaults in, but you can go through and decide if you want to change any of the settings. Okay, once that's done, we can finish. And next up, I'm going to go ahead and download the .NET 8. And since I have Windows, most people are going to be downloading the x64. Okay, now go ahead and install that. Okay, so we're all set there. Everything should be all set up. Now at that point, I should be able to go ahead, run this. Now I will still get those first couple errors because we're running Windows 10 here. And you should be at that point. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and set things up on my system. Now, depending on what you have installed, it may or may not want to upgrade through different things. And so you may have to allow certain things to install, and it may go through other steps during that process. If you don't have the latest Git and stuff like that, it may update some things. So just be aware of that. What you actually get, you may get different dialogues coming up while it's running. Now, once that's done running, back up to the screen like I showed before with that fresh install. Now, this is on my regular system now, so I've already got things installed on here, so it didn't have to go through most of those steps. Once you get to this point, you want to agree to the license. Then we're going to go ahead and you'll notice it didn't ask about my GPU because I'm running an Nvidia GPU, so it automatically went with that. Now, if you do get this message when you hit the agree button, that means a couple different things. One, if you're on a system with an Nvidia GPU and you get this, that means something's not set up correctly. So I'd be trying to figure that out first. Now, otherwise, if you don't have an Nvidia GPU, then this does give you the option to install the AMD version. I don't know much about that. I don't have an AMD system to test it on. On here, it pretty much tells you that it may not work well. So you can go ahead, give it a shot, and let me know. If you're running NVIDIA, which is preferably the best way to be running it, then you won't get that option. Now in here, you can just go ahead and just install with the defaults, or you can customize settings. I'm going to go through and just customize the settings so you can see what they are. So we're just first choose a theme, and then if you want to just set it up for yourself on this PC, or do you want to set it up with LAN access? So if you want to use it on your phone locally on your own network, you can set that up as well. I'm just going to go ahead with the standard. Now for the backends, we're just going to be selecting the default ComfyUI. It'll set everything up. I'm not going to dive into any of the rest of that. Next. Now at this point, you have the options to have it automatically download the models that you want to use. Now, I don't recommend downloading the base stable diffusion, because at this point that's pretty old, and in all honesty, if you're going to be running stable diffusion with Swarm, you might as well use one of the more up-to-date checkpoints. So we're not going to jump in. I'm not going to have it download that. Now you can have, if you're going to be using it for Flux, which I assume a lot of people will be using it for, because in my personal opinion, I'm still prefer Fooocus as my SDXL user interface. And that's a good chunk of that's for the Inpainting and the fact that I'm very familiar with it. So I'm going to have it just go ahead and download the Flux dev. Now there's two options. Think of this one, the first one as the turbo version, and the second one as the standard version. Now you do want to know what the licensing agreements, I'm not going to jump into that, but do be aware that they are different licensing agreements than SDXL was. Depending on which one you want to use, if you want to use the turbo, then go ahead and just grab the, you know what, for this purpose, I'm going to grab turbo. And it does give you some ideas of what the settings should be when you're running this. It's a good idea to read those so you're aware of that. The CFG is 1, how many steps, 4. Because these things are not the default when Swarm launches, so you will want to be changing those if you're going to be running those. We'll hit next. And then it gives you an overview of all your settings. I'm sure I want to do it because I got everything all set up. So I'm going to hit yes, install now. At this point, it's going to go through and download and set up everything that it needs. It will grab the models for me because I've told it to grab that model. And if you're grabbing the Flux model or any of those, you will need a decent amount of space. Now, if you are running this and you plan on using it with other UIs and sharing folders, you may not want to download that yet. And you may want to set up your folders first and then download it yourself. And I'll show you quickly how to configure those sorts of things once I get this set up. And if we dive in and bring up the command window, we can see it's actually, what it's doing back here. It is still downloading the model. And now everything should be installed, and hopefully you should have a screen like this. I'm not going to jump too much into anything unless I feel it's important as I go along. And hopefully with the basics, you'll be able to pretty much make pretty good use out of Swarm, especially if you have any experience with previous user interfaces. Now, I may reference certain things with Fooocus because that's what I normally use, and I expect a lot of people might be coming over from that. I am at some point soon I'm trying to make a video that will compare certain features on Fooocus and the equivalent on Swarm, because some of the terminology and everything's a little bit different, but a lot of the features do work the same for the most part. On our first screen here, oh, and if you do run into any issues and you start getting errors or anything or have problems, I do recommend jumping on their Discord, or they do have a discussion board as well on GitHub, which they've recently started using, but Discord is pretty busy. On our main screen here in the Generate tab page that we're on, we have on the left here, and you will find these arrows. When you click on those, they will hide the panels, and you can bring them open, which is nice. Once you have everything set here, you can close that, work and have a full window here, especially if you're doing any inpainting or anything else, and only have to open that when you need to. You can also resize it, of course, down to a certain point. Now, on each one of these, you can open and close each section, and there is the advanced options as well. So we can click on that, so it'll show more options in here if we want those. I'm not going to be diving into a lot of that at the moment. I'll cover what I think is important for the basics. Now, if we open up the core parameters, well, we'll jump back into this after. I just want to give a general overview here. Now, at the bottom, and you will find the same idea here, you can minimize this completely, or almost completely, and then open it back up. You can also slide this up and down, which is actually pretty useful now that I've gotten used to it, because I usually will keep it a lot of times down in this area. So if there's anything in here, I'll have that stuff available. I can use the filters. And then when I need to use stuff down here more, I can pull that up, do what I need to do, and then take and drag this back down when I'm done, and then work in here. And when combined with closing this down, you can give yourself quite a bit of room in here. Along the bottom there, we do have the image history, and that'll show all your images, and you'll have the structure, everything will come in down here. And you can change how a lot of this works on the back end, where these folders are and stuff, and I'll show you that. Filters are pretty nice. And now we have our presets. Do most settings, I believe, with presets, or at least an awful lot of them. They can be used for a lot of different stuff. I'm going to show you after how to get the styles out of from Fooocus and import them so you can have them as presets. And then we have the models tab down here. In that section will have your models. Now I selected Flux, so I have that down here. Now when you click on a model right over here, you're going to see it pop up, and that'll tell you which model that you're using. You can also pull it up in there. Oops. Okay. Now, sometimes if you have issues with certain models, it needs to know the architecture. So in here, you can click on the hamburger menu thing, and in here we have, well, I'm just going to bring up the metadata, and we can change stuff in here. And I know a lot with Flux and stuff, sometimes with the models, I've had to change the architecture. Now this one's already set up, everything's in there, so that's fine. And most of the time, depending on where you're getting them from, that'll be fine. But if you do have problems, just double check in here and make sure that these things are at least set up for it knows what architecture it needs to use. And you may need to set the resolution as well if those aren't set. Then we have our VAEs. Our LoRa's as well would be in here, just like the models. And you will find that if you have a lot, it can really fill up. And then you can change the way that it's displayed in here as well. I'll bring this one up from my other system that isn't currently running at the moment, but this is my normal install. And you'll see in here, you can see them there by small cards. We can do full-size cards. We can change it to thumbnails. We can change it to, pretty much anything you can think of in here. In all honesty, there's pretty much every option that really I've never found super useful, but it really doesn't matter too much because you do have the filter option here. So you can just start typing in what you're looking for. It'll bring it up. Once you get used to using that, that's extremely powerful. So don't forget that you have that. Create new presets. You can import presets or export them in here. So you can also edit them pretty easily. Once you generate an image, you can go into here and we can go to edit preset. And then you can click on this and it'll use the image that's in there. Give you an idea. And that applies to pretty much all of these. Will do the same thing. Laura's as well. You also will have control nets, and you'll have you can have wildcards down here. And then we have our tools section, which has the powerful grid generator. You can set this up with all sorts of different parameters and have it generate a grid or just a whole bunch of images. I use this, set it up to basically do all my presets or go through a whole list of things. So it's pretty powerful. I'm gonna not cover that really in this video, so let's move along. Then we have up in the top right, we have our quick tools where you can reset the page layout, reload the parameter values. Do get in the habit of learning to use some presets and creating them, because if you do create presets, you can set all sorts of stuff in here. These are all the settings you can set up, and that way you won't have to remember all the different settings. You can have one for Flux, one for Stable Diffusion, whatever, and choose those. And then in the middle, of course, we have our generate. Go ahead, generate our images, and up here will be our image editor. That'll come up if you do Inpainting, things like that. The next one is the Comfy workflow section. I'm not really going to dive into this, but then we have utilities in here. I'm not going to really dive into these much, except for the model downloader. So what we can do is if we want to have Swarm handle our model downloads, we can do this. So let's go ahead and we're going to download this Laura here. I might be partial to this one. And I'm just going to copy the URL up here. And because it's on Civet AI, we can go ahead and just paste that in. It'll pull in everything else that we need down here. And if we want to set up a folder, we can choose a folder it might be in. And if we don't have the folder already, as it says in here, you can actually just use the / symbol and set it up yourself. When you type that in, the path that you want it saved at, it will create that folder. So don't forget, these tooltips are very useful. Some not so useful, some are. They're improving. I will say it is a nice feature. One problem I have with it is uses some different terminology than what I'm used to. So once we have that, I'll just go ahead and download that. So I have that set up. And then let's say we want to do this for a checkpoint for SDXL, because I didn't download one before because I didn't want to use just the base one. So in here, we can do the same thing. We'll paste the link. And if we wanted to set up any folders or anything like that, so we could set up SDXL folder, and I'll go ahead and download that as well. So that's how the model downloader works in here. So you can use that if you want to. I personally don't, but I might start using it more because of the folder feature. That is useful. I like having my models in a folder. It makes it a lot easier. Each different types of, I have folders for realistic models, everything. So that's under the utilities, and then under the user section, this was where you're going to find a lot of the user-based settings. So under user info, you can set up API keys for like Civet AI if you're trying to download something that's behind a gate, or basically if it requires you to sign in to download, then you can put your API in here from Civet AI. And under user settings, these are a lot of the different ones. You can have like your image format if you want metadata, the AEs that you want to use, all this sort of stuff. Those are in there. Then there's parameter configuration, but really I wouldn't mess with any of this unless you absolutely know what you're doing. And I don't even really mess with most of that. Next section is the server tab here. In that server section, we have the server info first. I'll cover that. This is all your basic information, lets you know what's going on here. The local network setup for sharing, but it shows your resource usage. We're going to come back to in a moment because it's going to be important when you first start running it if you run into any problems. Any users, you can down here, you can shut down the server, or you can update and restart the server, or if you need to free up memory. Backends in here, this is the Comfy backend. Now, if you do need to edit any of these options in here, you do need to click on this pencil icon first. So a lot of your logs are going to be in here, and up at the top you'll see a drop down for all different options. So if you get an error or anything goes wrong, you can go into the debug logs and see potentially what the issue is. Server configuration here. This is going to be a lot of your other settings you might think that's in the user section. So if you're looking for something, you don't find it in one, check in the other one. But this has a lot of your folder locations. So if you wanted to change this and share with the other install, you'd go in here and do that. So for example, I have mine still technically are all in my stability matrix install because I was using that to manage my models and everything before. I don't as much now, but I do use it for a couple other things, so I just leave everything in there. So in order to set this up so I can share the models that I already have, I just need to go in and I'm going to go ahead, grab that path here. I can paste that path and we're going to save that. Now, the other thing I would need to do as well, because on mine in here, it's not using the stable dash diffusion for the models. Go in here, I have no models in there. It does have the folder because when I last set it up, that's what it did automatically. But it has the stable diffusion folder here. So all I need to do is for that, just copy, go in, and I'll paste that in there. Same thing. And then I can go ahead and do that for LoRa's. I can do it for anything at that point. So this matches up with what you already have inside your model. You know, this folder here. So if my LoRa folder is already the correct one, I don't need to put that path in there. I'm already set for that. And I didn't need to even put this whole path in here. I could have just put the stable diffusion and that's it. Because it's got the root folder here. And it's the same thing for the output path. If you want to put that somewhere else, you can change that path. I'm currently, this one I'll just leave in the same path for right now. Here you have your network settings, metadata. There's a lot of stuff in here that I haven't even fully dug into yet, only when I've needed something. So I'm not going to cover a lot of these. I will in the future. Now, another thing I do want to show, I did already mention it once, but we're going to cover, let's see, if we go into the server info here, we want to get back to this screen. Swarm, it does not just automatically update. So you can launch it and then go down here, update and restart the server. And you can also go into the folder that you install it into. So if we go into there, we'll find that there's files in here like update Windows. We could run that. And that's also how we can launch it as well, launch Windows, BAT. But it does also put the icon on your desktop as well. So how you do it is up to you, but this technically is what launches it. I usually just end up updating it this way. I find that easier. I just click on the desktop, boom, go in. I don't have to dive into the folder. Let's go ahead and generate our first one. And now this is something you might run into when you first start trying, especially if you're trying to use Flux and you have minimal specs. I have 32 gigs of RAM, so most of the time I don't have an issue, and I didn't run into any issues until just recently. And so I do want to show that just in case. Another error while I'm thinking about it real quick first is if you do happen to leave this grid, so we hit the grid generator like this, and we just leave that blank, and we didn't have anything in there, and I go back, do my models, and I hit generate, I'm going to get no access defined. So if you get this error, that's what it's talking about. It doesn't say it's the grid, but that's what it is. So you just need to go in here and just turn that off or fill in the stuff that you want in the grid, one of the two. That's what that error is. So now the one thing I did run into, I've made it so I'm using a lot of RAM in my system right now. If we look on here, I'm already using 22 gigs of my 32. So, and the reason for this is I want to show you what you might get for an error, and if you do, what you can do to help solve that problem if you run into it. So let's go back to the generate. I do have it on Flux. I do have it set for what I want. Let's just go with 2 images, and then I'm just going to hit generate. Now, once I do that and I watch the server in here, if I watch this memory go up, so if you run into this issue, Well, I'm not. It's actually loading it up. But if you run into an error about the back end having issues, when you go to run something like Flux or anything like that, go into the server section here and watch and see what happens, because it might be running out of system memory or something like that. I tried to really push mine, but it didn't seem to run into that problem. But if you do run into that problem about no backends, that potentially could be what your issue is. And you just got to make sure you free up some RAM, close some things if you have things going. Don't have 40 or 50 tabs open in a browser. Don't leave your video editor open like I have, which I was trying to do. But we'll go back over into Flux here. Now, if you want to see what is happening in the back end, of course, we can go into the logs. Now that's the exact. So if we go into here, we can see what's actually happening if we're curious in the back end. That way you can see how fast your image is generating. Now I've gone ahead, like I said, I didn't have any issues I was expecting to. I was trying to get myself the issues, but for some reason I couldn't force it to throw an error. But if you do get that error when you first set up Flux, and you, especially if you don't have a massive amount of RAM or VRAM, stuff like that, you could be running into memory issues. So just go into your server tab, go into your server info, and you can see in here what your memory is hitting. The time I was having the error, literally the free memory went down to 0, and then it spit out that error right on here. It would say no backends, went from there. I did want to dive into some of these real quick settings first before I let you go and show you how to set up that presets from the styles. So why don't we do that first, actually. I'm going to go ahead and under presets, and I'm going to say import presets. Okay, I have my preset file, and I will share a link. Actually, I'll put this on my Patreon on the free side of it, so anybody can go there and grab this file. I'll put a link there, and that will be on the Patreon. And I do want to thank, this file actually is mostly the result, because this will include all the images, and that was because of South Bay J. You can check his page out on Civet AI. He's got some pretty good, one of my favorite models in there, which is the Flower Power one. And he's working on a lot of Flux ones right now. Probably half my information for Flux, he's been keeping me up to date on a lot of that when I was having other issues, and my YouTube stuff and everything else. So he's the one that took care of this file for me, and so I'm going to share it with everybody else. So it'll be on the Patreon page, but it'll be on the free side, so you can just download it. And if you do go ahead and use that preset file and you find it very useful, and if you have a Civet AI account with a little bit of extra buzz sitting around, maybe head on over and tip South Bay J for his work on that. And now once I've loaded that file up, I'm just going to go ahead and hit import, and I can check off if I want to overwrite any existing ones if you had any set up. So we'll hit import on that, and it says it's imported. So we can cancel, and now we have all our presets. And now at this point, you can just leave the images if you want your own. I've already started going through for certain ones, edit preset, and then we could use this image by clicking that off, and it would change that image. Obviously, I don't want to do that because that's not from that. When you want to choose presets in here, at that point, we can just start clicking them, and it's going to show you along here your presets that you have selected, and we can just get rid of them by Xing those out. And at this point, you could also go in and modify your presets at any point if you like to, which, is pretty useful. If there's a certain word in these styles that you don't like, you can get rid of them. Now, as far as a lot of these parameters, so we have our images. That's the number of images. We can click and drag to increase, or we can just type in the number of images. And then the seed here, if you want random, set to -1, and then how many steps. Since we're using the Flux model here, we have it set to 4 for the turbo one. CFG scale, which for the Flux we would want to use the 1. And you have seed options in here. Then you have your resolutions in here. You can go in here and change these around. Now these are not the exact resolutions. Do keep that in mind. They're close to the 16:9, but if you actually open it and you look at the resolution, not exactly that. So just keep that in mind. Then we have our sampling options if we want to change those in here. Now, if you want to use the initial image and go from there, I'm not going to be covering a lot of that at the moment. The upscale, we have our control net settings are all in here for our first control net, and we get other ones as well in here. And there's a lot of more options in here as well. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all those, but if you wanted to, so for like control net, if you wanted to use this, we would just click on that, put the slider over, and then from there we could choose the file and all the other settings for in here. The other option, if you're wondering about inpainting, well, we do have the option to inpaint. Let's say we generated this image. We could click on edit image at this point. And the basics of inpainting, I'm just going to jump into just the very basics on here, but do know there is a lot of advanced stuff in here. It's got the SAM2, and when you click on that, let's say we wanted to do that, I'm going to show you that because it is something you need to want to be aware of how this works. So once we click on that, it's going to ask us if we want to install that. You're going to find that through a lot of things on here when you go to use things. We'll hit install, hit the messages, and then that goes ahead and will install. And now it's reloading the back end. Everything should be all set. So let's go back onto the mask. So this is basically the basic inpainting. So we have the image layer here, and now we're on the mask layer. So that's what we want to be painting on. Now I got to do my radius, and there we go. Much better. Then I can go ahead, do what I did before. Set my settings up, and should be all set now to generate. And so that's basically how the inpainting works with Flux, which I haven't really played around with much yet to know how to get really good results with Flux. I haven't done a lot of inpainting with that, and you do have other options as well. Like if you want to use reference images, you can drag images down to your prompt, and that'll bring up and install, this revision section, and then you can go ahead. You can install the IP adapter. I'm not going to cover all that, but that's how some of those things work on here. Well, that pretty much covers the basics of Swarm and should get you started. Do keep in mind that Swarm is still in constant development, so expect the occasional bug. That's why I back up my Swarm folder before doing an update now, just to be on the safe side. I do plan on more videos like I've done in the past with Fooocus, but will mention that many of the things in my Fooocus videos can be done in Swarm as well, so those videos still can be useful. I also am still using Fooocus as my primary tool for SDXL, especially for inpainting. So I don't feel it's dead. And if you'd like to support this channel, you can do that either on Patreon, or I do have a link to buy me a cup of electricity as well in the description. If you found the video useful, please do hit that like button because it does help. And thanks for watching, and have fun creating.